Last year, around this time, I wrote about the difficult task of consolidating more than a decade and a half of personal and professional evolution into a single website. It was, and is, a process of self-reflection and self-curation, all wrapped up in a feeble attempt at information architecture. In that episode, I considered the implications of all the broken links strewn around my online life, both the literal ones and the metaphorical ones. Literal broken links, while frustrating, had technical explanations. When I found one, I knew why it happened and exactly how to go about fixing it. But another part of the consolidation process was frustrating in a more existential sense. As I went back through my archives to visually tidy up articles from the recent past, I was regularly confronted by the fact that I didn't remember the essay in front of me. This was especially jarring when the argument or prose was, to my mind, good. It's one thing to forget about something unpolished or less than compelling. It's another thing to lose track of an idea that really landed. But such is the life and work of a hacker. I'm Tara McMullen, and this is What Works, the show that rethinks work, business, and leadership for the 21st century economy. Today, I want to talk about hacking, and specifically how intentional hacking reminds me to circle back, to evolve and progress my thinking, rather than regurgitate or repurpose it. I've discussed Mckenzie Wark's concept of the hacker before, and here's how she starts to define it. Quote, "The hacker class produces new information." But what is new information? It is whatever intellectual property law recognizes as new. It's a strange kind of production, where the farmer grows crops through a seasonal cycle and the worker stamps out repetitive units of commodities. The hacker has to use their time in a different way to turn the same old information into new. The workplace nightmare of the worker is having to make the same thing over and over against the pressure of the clock. The workplace nightmare of the hacker is to produce different things over and over against the pressure of the clock. A little later, she writes, and I think this might sound familiar, "There's no relation between the units of labor time and the units of value produced. Something cooked up on the spur of the moment might have enormous value. Long hours of slog might end up being for nothing. Being exempt from routine work is not really all that glamorous in either story, as it just brings uncertainty, frustration, pressure, and for some, madness." Now, the concept of hacking has been at the back of my mind for the last few weeks as I've worked on finalizing Blank Slate, my quote-unquote new workbook on reimagining your small business for greater sustainability and ease. And in a way, and I don't mean this pejoratively, Blank Slate is a hack. I took work that I've created, improved, and field tested over the last 15 years and produced something new from it. Now, I don't want to defend the political economy of hacking. That is the set of incentives and constraints that leave so many of us consistently looking for new shapes for old ideas, not to mention losing track of what we've already created. But I think that hacking has been a process that's allowed me to grow as a thinker and has helped me develop an appreciation for maintenance systems and incremental progress. Now, to be clear, when Wark talks about hacking, she's referring to the many ways we all create information today. Every website you visit, every location ping your phone receives, every time one of your devices gets close to someone else's device. These are all events that create information that flows through companies that have made it their business to turn that data into a flow of dollars and cents. Today, though, I'm going to zoom in on the information work, the hacking, that's legible as such. Producing knowledge, communicating ideas, sharing stories, gathering research, and other more overt forms of creative production. So I'm playing a little fast and loose with her idea, but I think it's a good framework for examining this process. And Wark herself writes about reclaiming the idea and practice of hacking as a tool, as something to enjoy even. Now, I want to tell you a little bit more about why I think Blank Slate is a hack. But first, let me tell you about the very first ebook I ever wrote. The very first ebook I ever wrote, published at the tail end of 2009, was called 52 Weeks of Blogging Your Passion. If there's a more 2009 title out there, I don't know what it is. Now, this ebook opened with some general advice on how blogging could support a creative business as a form of marketing. This was a relatively new idea at the time. The main part of the ebook was a set of 52 prompts for writing blog posts. For example, share an important step of your process and how you came to do it the way you do. Now, I have no memory of how many I sold or what kind of revenue it generated. At the time, my primary business was still direct sales of display ads. But I know I was pleased with the sales and continued creating more digital products, including a second book of prompts called, you guessed it, 52 More Weeks of Blogging Your Passion. 52 Weeks was a guide to hacking. How do you take this thing that you do, drawing, designing, knitting, and produce content from it week after week after week? How do you produce something different from the same process? The ebook itself was also a hack. I took the kinds of questions I asked in written interviews with makers and reworked them into a content strategy business owners could apply to themselves. To call it a hack isn't meant to downplay its value, but to acknowledge that 52 Weeks wasn't a knowledge product that went from non-existent to existent in any kind of self-contained way. Now, my latest project, Blank Slate, followed a similar process. On January 2nd, 2025, yes, I had to look that up, I went into my Canva archive and found 3 resources I'd created previously. A participant guide for a virtual retreat I hosted in 2021, a slide deck for a workshop I taught in 2024, and a workbook for a program I taught through another company, also in 2024. I copied each of those resources into a new project and started to sort through the various pages. I combined what was redundant, reordered what was left, and started to note what was missing. Throughout 2025, I worked on it in fits and starts. I revised and updated, I wrote and diagrammed, I borrowed and reworked. By May, I'd gotten through about a third of what I thought the guide required. But then summer seminar started, and then Making Sense, and all throughout the year, my kid was making final decisions about college, which ended up taking an unexpected amount of my mental bandwidth in addition to considerable time. I picked it back up in late November and committed to finishing it. And now it's done. At least the first edition is done. I'm sure I will have plenty of updates for it. Not only is Blank Slate the product of 3 previous iterations of teaching on business development and strategy, but it's also the product of countless conversations with clients and students over more than 15 years. Some of the exercises, like the perspective map, are ones I've used over and over again and rarely change. Others are the great-great-grandchildren of long-defunct exercises. I could have created this guide years ago, but I think the reason it started to come into focus a year ago was because I was in that process of consolidating my various old websites, a process that required me to revisit everything I'd written in the previous 3 years, plus all of my greatest hits from the 5 to 8 years before that. Going back through old work can be a bit, as the kids say, triggering. As in, it's embarrassing. But there are also moments when I thought, wow, I wrote that? Now, old work doesn't resurface the way a memory does. Reading, watching, or listening to forgotten work isn't transportive. It doesn't take me back to a forgotten experience. It doesn't remind me that life and its experiences are fleeting. it reminds me that my day-to-day work is largely ephemeral, largely weightless. Even when, as has become increasingly frequent, rediscovering old work is a pleasant surprise, the feeling is bittersweet. I feel good about what I once made, but disappointed that I forgot something I worked so hard on. Now, the political economy that produces hacking as a labor process also renders the products of that labor process disposable. There's no incentive to go back to my old Instagram posts, just as there's no reason to reuse a Kleenex. In fact, more often than not, doing so has negative consequences. What I've learned in the process of reshaping my work, the process of hacking, is that just because real pressure exists to make something and immediately forget about it, to produce something new out of old ideas, to regurgitate and repurpose, I don't have to bend to that pressure. There were times when I was working on Blank Slate when I did, in fact, go back into my old Instagram posts to see how I diagrammed something in the past or what metaphor I used to communicate an idea. I went back into resources I'd created in 2019 and courses I taught in 2016. This work isn't actually disposable. I've just treated it that way because that's how the incentives line up. And so, unlike Kleenex, the only thing that can make my older work disposable is me. It's up to me to resurface it, to improve it, to re-engage with it. Writer Anuat Loro offers a similar metaphor for thinking about the incentives that shape how we create today. She distinguishes between heavy things and light things. Heavy things require time, thoughtfulness, and care to create. Light things are fast, superficial, and frictionless. The modern maker's machine, she writes, resists weight and avoids friction. It does not care for patience, deliberation, or anything but production. Now, I like this metaphor very much, although I'll admit that I prefer to draw less stark lines between categories. And I believe that an Instagram post can, to mix metaphors a bit, punch above its weight. I made it my goal to create heavy Instagram posts for a while, and those are exactly the posts that I went back to while I was creating Blank Slate. An Instagram post that stands the test of time, that's worth coming back to, that begs to be reworked and improved upon, resists the conveyor belt logic of the corporatized internet. Resisting ephemerality and returning to old work in a system that prioritizes the new can be a source of power. It's not the kind of power that will topple the system. We need solidarity and collective action for that. But it is the kind of power that can help us gather resources for more consequential resistance in the future. Now, Jenny Odell, in her book, How to Do Nothing, links the information environment to the physical environment. She writes, just as practices like logging and large-scale farming decimate the land, an overemphasis on performance turns what was once a dense and thriving landscape of individual and communal thought into a Monsanto farm whose production slowly destroys the soil until nothing more can grow. Now, I can't think of a better metaphor for the kind of creative burnout that easily results from hacking. The short-term incentives that shape hacker labor reward a kind of monocultural approach to knowledge production and creative expression. There are only so many times you can sow and reap the same creative crop before the soil is utterly depleted. But note that Odell says the goal that creates the problem is an overemphasis on performance. Just as it's not farming that's the problem with hyper-optimized, production-oriented agriculture, hacking isn't the problem with a hyper-optimized, production-oriented information economy. The system relies on overemphasizing performance to eke out greater and greater profits. All the visible incentives point us toward bigger crop yields without regard for meaning, quality, or value. For years, I dutifully created content for Twitter, then Facebook, and then Instagram, finding new ways to talk about the same old things. And when the goal is simply figuring out what to deliver to the algorithm god 5 days a week, it is not fun. It is not fulfilling. And yes, it absolutely leads to creative burnout. And none of that is a recipe for remarkable content or remarkable stories or remarkable ideas. We didn't need AI to create slop. We were perfectly capable of it ourselves. Without care and intention, hacking inevitably creates slop. But with care and intention, the result can be quite different. Wark's definition of hacking evokes a sense of cyclicality. When done for the wrong goal, that is the overemphasis on performance, hacking is a reinforcing feedback loop that spirals out of control. With different aims, however, there is balance. Odell writes, "This is something like a goal without telos, a view toward the future that doesn't resolve in a point, but rather circles back toward itself in a constant renegotiation." Now, this is the kind of hacking that I've been trying to practice for the last few years. Circling back and renegotiating my ideas, or knee-jerk responses masquerading as ideas, revising and improving and asking new questions, complicating and simplifying, rethinking. I realize that what I'm describing as hacking is really the age-old process of iteration. We take our ideas and improve on them. We return to them, reshape them, experiment with them, expand on them, and produce the next iteration. The political economy of hacking would have us forget to return, to iterate. Its performance depends on our forgetting. But the actual work process of hacking is an iterative process that continually improves upon its product. Hacking isn't new, but hacking as a production process is. The key to reclaiming hacking is to create processes or tools for circling back. On a recent episode of the Vergecast, platformer founder Casey Newton described how he used an app to capture ideas and then randomly resurface them in a daily note. He also used Claude Code to create an interactive database of more than 800 past editions of Platformer. Now, I haven't done this yet, but I plan to. And like Newton, I've wanted something like that for years. With the rise of personal knowledge management apps and systems, there are more tools for circling back than ever before. But we do have to seek them out. Instagram isn't designed to remind you of that heavy post you made 3 years ago. WordPress or Substack or Squarespace isn't going to proactively point you back to that quick post you made last year that could be expanded into a more substantial essay. There's just no upside for them to do that. So it's up to us. One more thing. Before the so-called creator economy coalesced into its current form, there was a lot of talk in small business marketing circles about getting off the hamster wheel of content creation. This metaphor belies the creative emptiness of hacking in the current political economy. Whether or not you're a content creator, there's probably some aspect of what you do that has that hamster wheel quality. And it might seem like the least valuable, least creative part of your work. And yet, I have a strong suspicion that this is an aspect of your work that has the potential to be reworked and approached anew. Running as fast as you can and getting nowhere sucks. That's why we've all wanted off that hamster wheel at one time or another. But put that same effort into getting somewhere you want to go, and the experience changes completely. You don't even need a destination in mind to transform the experience of hacking. You don't need to have set your sights on writing a book, creating a course, or developing a method. Putting your effort towards finesse or clarity can be enough to turn your experience into something meaningful. I'm talking about making media because media making is my context, but this idea of re-engaging with the work on our own terms applies to all sorts of hacking. Circling back isn't the same as going nowhere fast. Circling back is how we get anywhere worth going. Circling back is a practice of presence within our own work, and rather than dwelling in the past, circling back invites us into a more substantial future. So, what could you circle back on today? If you're ready to circle back on your business strategy and get clear on what your next phase of business could look like, check out Blank Slate. Blank Slate is your guide to rethinking how you've always done things by approaching business strategy from goals to brand to business model to marketing in a systematic way. Blank Slate is a 130-plus page guide and workbook that helps you become your own best business strategist. I've distilled more than a decade and a half of working with and teaching small business owners how to think differently about their businesses and make smart and sustainable choices about meeting their own needs while delighting their customers or clients. Find out more about Blank Slate at whatworks.fyi/blankslate.